Pro wrestling is an ever-evolving industry, with encyclopedias being updated, documentaries being released, and relationships mended or destroyed. The attitudes and narratives of wrestling superstars begin to change. Individuals like the Ultimate Warrior, Bruno Sammartino, and others are brought back into prominence, while the history of some of the other bright characters are being washed away or changed. Some are pigeonholed and being remembered for that one event or that one specific moment in time. Others become as insignificant as a crossword answer. My job as PWP's resident historian is to remind you of the impact that these individuals and teams left on the industry. This is PW Profiles. You remember when Daniel Bryan started wearing the fur on his boots?
Yeah.
You know who that was a tribute for? Along with his long hair and kind of crazy facial hair?
Goats. Because he looked like a goat.
I guess. It was also Bruiser Brody, one of professional wrestling's loved performers, who unfortunately was taken very soon. I'm sure you've heard of Bruiser Brody.
Yeah.
It seems like everyone has. Even before the Dark Side of the Ring, it was always that kind of trivia fact, which wrestler was, stabbed and killed. And he didn't always believe it until he started looking into it. But before that tragedy happened, Bruiser Brody was a hardcore wrestler. He's kind of like Kane, where he's just huge in size, but he was one of the smartest men. On his Dark Side of the Ring, they show him giving an interview, and he's just so eloquent with his speech. And people say that that's kind of what got him in trouble a lot of times, because he didn't want a job, because he was smart, because he knew, if you lose, then that lessens your paycheck. There's been numerous times where he's, supposedly threatened performers, threatened promoters. There was one cage match with Lex Luger where he stopped working and he just stood around. The ref tried to talk to him, and then Luger decided to get disqualified because they had to figure out something to do. Before this match, supposedly Bruiser Brody told Lex Luger he wasn't going to take any of his shit, and he proved it. He was big in Japan, he was big in Puerto Rico. He actually planned on buying a share in Puerto Rico and helping to promote there, helping to train there. As I said, he hardly would ever lose matches. It would have been interesting to see. It was rumored that he was going to be brought in to face Hulk Hogan. Would Brody have been one of the heels that could have beat Hogan and then would have to lose back to him? I would have loved to have seen Bruiser Brody fight The Undertaker. But unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, that did not get to happen because of the stabbing incident. It was in Puerto Rico. The story goes, he was asked to go into the shower to talk to Jose Gonzalez, who at the time was, I want to say, Invader #1. Yep. And it might sound weird to talk in the shower, but that's where wrestlers would do it, so that way no fans, no reporters, people couldn't hear the match, because, wrestling was still real. This is when they still had babyface and heel locker rooms. And according to the Dark Side of the Ring, Tony Atlas said he heard a loud "ugh," and Bruiser Brody came out holding his abdomen, and then Invader tried to stab him again, cut off his ponytail, Tony Atlas says. And then Tony was the one who took him to the hospital. They were in Puerto Rico, so Tony didn't take him. Tony put him in the ambulance and then carried him into the hospital, and then had a doctor finally help him. Because at first they weren't going to do anything, because the way Tony said it was a stabbing in Puerto Rico was nothing. It's just every day. Until Tony finally explained, his intestines were hanging out. Doctors finally started working on him. Supposedly, everything was going to be okay. Tony then went back and saw that the blood was cleaned up in the locker room. And the cops were talking, and the cops asked him, like, did you see the fan that did this? That's Tony. What fan? What are you talking about? And they're like, oh, a fan came in and stabbed him because they didn't like him. And that's, again, in the ring. He pointed at Invader #1 and said, that motherfucker's the one that stabbed Bruiser Brody. And he said this in front of Carlos Colon, who is the head booker. At that point, it's actually Savio Vega told Tony Atlas that his bags were packed. You know, they were looking for him at the hotel. Tony Atlas spent the night on the beach. People found out later. Iron Sheik found out in a match. I forget exactly who he was facing, but he asked about Brody, and the Superstars found out while Dutch Mantel called to get any info on him that Bruiser Brody passed away when no one was there. That they didn't fix his intestines correctly, or something happened, and he passed away. Iron Sheik asked how it was, and then he's like, "Oh, these crazy fans." And again, he was told, like, "No, Invader did it." And that's, I mean, you know, Iron Sheik, that motherfucker killed the King Kong Brody. I'll kill that motherfucker. And then he just left the match. As ironic as it is, Abdullah the Butcher, who is one of Bruiser Brody's largest rivals, grandest of all time, he was leaving because of what happened. And he's the one that met Bruiser Brody's wife as she got off the plane. It was unintentional. And she asked him, because she was called to get over there, and she asked him how Frank was, which is his name. And Abdullah looked at her and said, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, how's Frank doing?" And she had introduced herself before. She's like, "You don't know me, but I'm, you know, his wife." And then he goes, "Brody's dead." So his greatest rival had to be the one to tell his family, because she had their young son there with her, that he was killed. He had a funeral there, and in our conspiracy episode, we talk about how it's rumored that they had to break his legs for him to fit into the casket, because they didn't have any for his size over there. He was honored in Japan, and Jose Gonzalez went free. It's rumored Carlos Colon helped in this, because by the time, you know, Dutch Mantel, Tony Atlas got called to go to court, the case had already happened. And because wrestling was believed to be real at this time, the cops just thought this was part of like a storyline, like the big bad Brody, you know, Jose to defend himself. It's still a conspiracy. It's still a lot of fingers pointed at Carlos Colon and Jose Gonzalez. It's one of the crazier moments of this is that Jose Gonzalez continued to wrestle, and he wrestled as lately at 2022, April of last year. As I said, the subpoenas were mailed late. They were about 10 days after the trial ended. But yeah, most fans, most wrestlers from the time kind of point fingers at Jose Gonzalez. This is one of those instances where he's kind of just a dickhead all around. He got most disgusting promotional tactic in 1989 because he was pushed as a babyface a year after the Bruiser Brody stabbing case. And in 1990, he also got it because he did an angle where he stabbed another wrestler. And all this because the rumor is Brody worked rough with him in the ring one time in the WWF. So Jose finally took it out on him. But Bruiser Brody's one of those where this murder kind of engulfs his career. As I said, he had a long and illustrious career before this happened. He appeared for pretty much any promotion you could think of. WCCW, AWA, Championship Wrestling from Florida, even the WWF, Southwest Championship Wrestling, obviously WWC, the Puerto Rican promotion. He was everywhere. He teamed a lot with Jimmy Snuka and Stan Hansen. And he also won tag team titles in multiple promotions with, Gino Hernandez, Kerry Von Erich, Ernie Ladd, Stan Hansen. I think he's the one that pisses me off the most about the Legacy Wing. He was inducted in 2019. But with everything that Brody did, he's one of them that should get a real induction. But he was just a blip in the Legacy Wing. As I said, there's a lot of rumors on what Brody would have done had he lived. Ran the Puerto Rican promotion. If this happened in '88, and the rumor was he was going to face Hogan at that next year's WrestleMania, which I think would have been, WrestleMania 5. So that would have cut the Mega Power story short, but there's a chance it would have been even better.
Yeah.
And I think Brody would have definitely loved the WWE, WCW, ECW, because he could have jumped from them, not been stale, not been jobbed out. I think he'd be a good knowledge for NXT as of right now. But this is one of those situations where we'll never truly know, because one guy was upset at how Brody worked with him. So, I mean, if you can, look at Bruiser Brody's biography. His wife helped write it. Watch the Dark Side of the Ring episode. And if you can, find matches of him. One of the better superstars. He could brawl, he could work, he could do hardcore. One of my favorites, one of the people that whenever I see there's merchandise of them, I jump on. He was one of the few the Brawlin' Buddies, I think they're called. Pro Wrestling Tees does. I bought his outright. I didn't just get it in a crate. I needed to have it. I'm hoping one day they have an elite of him. As of right now, he's in the Power Town Wrestling series, but the legs look bad. Hopefully one day he'll appear in a WWE video game. I mean, it seems like they're trying to have a good working relationship with Puerto Rico, so probably not anytime soon. But yeah, whether he's, King Kong Brody, which he used out of respect because he didn't want to be called the Bruiser in the Minnesota territory that already had Dick the Bruiser, or the more famous Bruiser Brody. He's one of my favorites, one of the forgotten relics of a time loaded with superstars, and he's one of our PW profiles.